An option is an agreement between two parties for a specified time period, up to the expiry date, that grants the holder the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell a specified quantity of an asset at a predetermined price, referred to as a strike or exercise price. Purchasing this right conveys no obligations, since the buyer, often referred to as the holder of the option, can let the option expire if so desired. The price paid for this right is the option premium. The seller, or writer of an option, has a short position in the underlying asset and must fulfill the contractual obligations if the buyer exercises. The option premium received is therefore a risk compensation. A call option grants the buyer the right to purchase the underlying asset at a pre-specified price, while a put option grants the buyer the right to sell the underlying asset at a pre-specified price. If exercised, the contractual obligations of an option can be settled by either physical delivery of the underlying asset or simply in cash. Before executing an option, each contract must specify the following: the underlying asset, the notional value of the contract, such as the equivalent number of shares or a specified quantity to be delivered, the price at which delivery or cash settlement occurs, and the date that the contract expires. Given that there are calls and puts, and that one is able to go long or short options, there are 4 basic option positions available. But these basic positions can be combined in a number of ways that offer the opportunity to profit from a wide range of asset price forecasts. The buyer of an option is generally buying the right to exercise the option against the option seller. The timing of the exercise privilege depends on the style of the option. European style options may only be exercised on the expiration date, while American style options can be exercised any time before expiration and typically offer investors greater flexibility, hence their popularity. However, this extra privilege may come at a higher price than an equivalent European option. Where an American and a European option are otherwise identical, i.e. having the same strike price, etc., the American option should be worth at least as much as the European. If it is worth more, then the difference is a guide to the likelihood of early exercise. But is it ever optimal to exercise an American option early? Option holders who wish to realize the full value of their position will typically sell it back to the market rather than exercise any position early, thereby sacrificing any time value available. But if an American option has a higher value, it implies that there are circumstances in which it may be optimal to exercise early. Such situations can arise in several ways. For example, an in-the-money call option on a stock may be exercised just prior to the dividend payment, which would lower its value by more than the option's remaining time value. Lastly, what is the Bermudan option? This option grants the buyer the right to exercise at discrete and predetermined dates throughout the life of the option. This is a halfway house between both the European and American style options. For example, a typical Bermudan swaption might confer the opportunity to enter into an interest rate swap. The option holder might decide to enter into the swap at the first exercise date, and so enter into, say, a 10-year swap, or defer and have the opportunity to enter in 6 months' time, and so enter a 9-year and 6-month swap. Most exotic interest rate options are of Bermudan style. The intrinsic value of a call option is the difference between the price of the underlying asset and the option strike price. Essentially, it is a profit, not net profit, since break-even should consider the initial premium costs, if the option were exercised immediately. A positive intrinsic value means that the option is currently in the money. An intrinsic value of 0 means that the option is at the money. By definition, the intrinsic value cannot be negative. Where there is no intrinsic value and the difference is substantial, the option is deeply out of the money. For put options, the intrinsic value is the difference between the strike price and the price of the underlying asset. Similarly, a positive intrinsic value means that the option is in the money. For example, where the strike is higher than the asset price, it makes sense to exercise. Again, a 0 value means that the option is at the money, and where the strike is substantially below the current price, such an option is deeply out of the money. At expiration, the value of the option is its intrinsic value, which is either positive or 0. Assets invariably have a forward price as well as a spot price. So one can also talk about moneyness with respect to the forward price. In the currency markets, it is convention to do so, thus one talks about at the money forward. For instance, if the spot price for $-yen is 120 and the forward price 1 year hence is 110, then a call struck at 110 is at the money forward, but not at the money. The option premium prior to expiration is comprised not only of intrinsic value, if any, but also time value. The time value of an option is the portion of the option premium that is attributable to the amount of time remaining until the expiration of the option contract. Time value is the difference between the option premium and its intrinsic value and represents the likelihood that the option seller has to pay more than the current intrinsic value in the future. The longer an option's time to expiration, the greater its time value, all else being constant, since the price of the underlying asset has more time to move in the forecasted direction. Intrinsic value is simple to calculate. On the other hand, time value in itself is more complicated since its value is determined by the interaction of several factors that depend on market conditions. Most importantly is the relationship between time value and implied volatility. As volatility increases, so does the time value. Why? Since time value reflects a probability that the option will gain in intrinsic value, it must reflect the increased probability that the option will be even further in the money prior to expiration. Therefore, by analyzing time value, it is a way of evaluating the price of an option, which is useful in determining if the option is over or undervalued compared with other options. Other point to note is that the time value of a conventional option cannot be negative because the option value can never be lower than its intrinsic value. Remember that options are wasting assets, and that time value converges towards 0 as expiration approaches. At expiration, where the option value is simply its intrinsic value, time value is 0. It is also worth noting that prior to expiration, the change in time value with time to expiration is nonlinear. As expiration draws nearer, the option value decays at an accelerating rate, all else remaining equal. As a general rule, an option will lose 1/3 of its value during the first half of its life and 2/3 during the second half of its life. Why is that the case? Put simply, there's a lesser and lesser probability of the market moving in the forecasted direction to generate further intrinsic value. So, how much is an option worth? In other words, how much should I pay for it, or how much should I charge the buyer? Let's look at this intuitively in a simplified risk-neutral world without transactional costs. From the buyer's perspective, the premium charge should be equivalent to the discounted expected payout at expiration. The expected payout is determined by the strike and adjusted for the probability of achieving it. It goes without saying that the probability is determined also by the level of volatility, the forward asset price, and the remaining time to maturity. From a seller's perspective, the appropriate premium charge should be the expected cost of hedging the option. More specifically, the value of an option can be estimated using a variety of quantitative techniques based on the concept of risk-neutral pricing using stochastic calculus. The most fundamental technique is a Black-Scholes model, although more sophisticated models are used to account for the volatility smile. What market parameters are important in valuing options, and how do they affect the mark-to-market valuation? Let us first look at the asset and strike prices. If we take the case of a call option, the expected payoff is the asset price less the strike price, and therefore a call option becomes more valuable as the asset price increases and less valuable as the strike price increases. The opposite is the case for put options. Time to expiration. Generally, both call and put options become more valuable as the time to expiration increases, though this is not necessarily always true for long-dated European-style options. What about volatility? Again, for both calls and puts, as the level of implied volatility increases, so does the option value. Since volatility measures the degree of uncertainty about future price movements, any increases must be reflected in higher option values to compensate for the higher associated market risk. With regard to the level of interest rates and the yield of the underlying asset, we must think in terms of the net cost of carry. In short, the risk-neutral forward price. As interest rates rise, this has the effect of increasing the value of call options while decreasing the value of put options. Why? Increases in interest rates drive forward prices higher, and therefore the potential intrinsic value of a call option increases. So this must be reflected in the premium valuation. The opposite is the case for put options. A similar relationship is observable for asset yields and dividends. Dividends, for example, have the effect of reducing the stock price on the ex-dividend date, which is clearly bad news for the value of the call options and good for the value of the put options. Therefore, the value of a call option is negatively related to the size of any anticipated dividends, while the value of a put option is positively related to the size of any anticipated dividends.